Imagine an island so remote and inhospitable that its only lasting legacy is a toilet. That's St. Matthew Island, a 32-mile long chunk of rock 300 kilometers away from the nearest town, located smack bang in the middle of the Bering Sea. Over the centuries, every human who's ever stepped foot on St. Matthew Island has had one really strong feeling: I should have stayed home. We're talking scurvy-ridden Russians, bullet-ridden polar bears, World War II Survivor Edition, and reindeers mating like there was a blackout on Valentine's Day. So buckle up, here's the whole saga. From prehistoric whispers to the present day, the story of an island which keeps telling humans, I told you so.
Where are you going?
Where are you, Ethan?
Where the hell are you going?
This one, in the Bering Sea.
St. Matthew Island.
Hello Arcticers, welcome back to the Arctic Beyond. So recently I made a video fact-checking the new Mission Impossible film The Final Reckoning. We looked at everything that took place in the Arctic, went through what they did right, what they did wrong. Most of it they got wrong. Almost all of the Arctic story takes place on one island, St. Matthew Island. And while I was doing my research into that video, I discovered the crazy, insane history of St. Matthew Island. St. Matthew is weird. St. Matthew is deadly. St. Matthew is probably cursed. So I thought we should go through exactly what makes this cursed little piece of rock between Alaska and Russia so unique. Chapter 1. Prehistory and Discovery. St. Matthew has never exactly been home sweet home for humans. Archaeologists have found a single 1,000-year-old pit house dug into the earth, likely built by the Thule people around 1000 AD. No hearth, no continuous village, just the leftovers of some really unlucky people who got blown way off course. Legends told by the local indigenous communities of the Aleut and Yupik people tell stories of people getting blown off course, landing on St. Matthew's Island, and just having to stick it out and wait until the sea ice completely freezes over in winter, letting them walk back home. In other words, if you landed on St. Matthew's Island, you better hope you packed your Glacier Island discs.
Thanks, Mom.
Have fun, kids! I'll just be here listening to my tunes.
Fast forward to 1764 to 1766, Lieutenant Ivan Sint of the Russian Navy charts the area, finds the island, and labels it on his map as I'. St. Matthew's Island. Just a few years later in 1778, the famous Captain James Cook sails in, sees the same chunk of tundra and thinks to himself, I found it, it's mine, I found this. Undiscovered land, I'm going to name it after my lieutenant. The history books will say that they were just friends.
History will say that you're the man who triumphed over the war and the rubber shortage.
And he named it Gore's Island. Of course, eventually, Cook's charts got mixed up with the Russian charts and they realised it had been named St. Matthew Island a few years beforehand, and his Gore's Island never really caught on. Is there anything more embarrassing than like announcing your new boyfriend and everyone just remembering your ex? Ooh.
That's my ex, Christine.
The naming history of the island is just one of those classic Age of Discovery tales, where everyone who went there just assumed they were the first person to find it. It's the same reason I think I'm going to be a millionaire every time I add cheese to biscuits and name them St. Jack's Miracle Discs, until I get taken away for a quick chat with HR. Chapter 2. The Russian Experiment Gone Horribly Wrong. By 1809, the Russian-American company, effectively Russia's first skinning Amazon, decided to test if it could build a permanent base on St. Matthew's Island. They sent 5 Russians and 7 Unangan Aleut hunters to overwinter there and hunt the local seals, foxes, maybe a polar bear or two. In less than a year, scurvy and starvation took their toll. Historical accounts report 4 of the Russians died of scurvy, as the foxes had clearly buried all the oranges to hide for spring, and then the rest of them basically starved when it turns out that all the seals they were hunting didn't stick around to keep getting hunted. Rude. The survivors, who were largely the Unangan people who knew where those oranges were buried, cut their losses and skedaddled back to the mainland. In short, St. Matthew gave them a very swift lesson. Island 1. Biped 0. Grow some extra legs or get the hell out of here. No permanent settlement was ever established. Scurvy, starvation, polar bears, one of those 3 would typically show up to crash the party. Anyone who ever passed by would take a look out the window, see a polar bear cleaning its tooth with a Russian femur, and wisely say, it's okay, I can wait another 2 days to use the bathroom. Chapter 3. The Great Polar Bear Massacre. By the mid-19th century, St. Matthew Island was known as a polar bear paradise. In 1874, a naturalist called Henry Elliot landed on the island primarily to survey the local seal population. He instead found so many bears. His journal says, "Judge our astonishment at finding hundreds of large polar bears, lazily sleeping in grassy hollows, or digging up grass under the roots, browsing like hogs." He's a fancy Brit in my imagining of the situation. Which, if you've even seen a second of my content, you will know this is my utopia. Vegan polar bears sleeping next to each other and digging up root vegetables. Excuse me, I need a minute to go cry in happiness at this Ghibli-esque vision. It is amazing how quickly humans can disappoint you. I'm reading Eliot's journal. I'm swept away to this utopian, mythical land of chilled polar bears being so happy. And then Eliot writes, "Oh, their steaks were excellent quality." This is why we can't have nice things, Eliot. See, St. Matthew Island was probably at this point the most bear-dense place on Earth. It made a Berlin nightclub look like a petting zoo.
There's a lot of bears and a ton of fish.
The humans, unsurprisingly, got a taste for polar bear steaks and showed up in force. Seal hunting vessels and US cutters would patrol the local seas, and crews that had some extra ammo would go on to St. Matthew Island for a bit of target practice. By the late 1890s, paradise was over. One US cutter, the Corwin, slaughtered 16 polar bears in a single trip, and that was the last anyone saw of them.
I'm as mad as hell, and I'm not gonna take this anymore!
A scientist, Harriman, went on an 1899 expedition to the island, reported 0 polar bears, and officially declared that they had been extirpated from St. Matthew Island. As Harriman would note in his report, the last 16 bears that were shot by the cutter were the coup de grace for the species. And the island went from my personal utopia to something about as lifeless as Melania Trump's eyes.
They are definitely dead.
Chapter 4. World War II and the Loran Station of Doom. Decades later, humans tried again. This time with tanks and radios. In 1943, the US Coast Guard set up a Loran station, long-range navigation, on St. Matthew Island. It was World War II. You know World War II, right? It was the Roman Empire of wars, in that it was actually a really bad thing, but anyone who spends too long thinking about it should probably keep a polite distance from everyone else.
I think World War II was my favorite war.
The military needed help with its own navigation, and it needed to try to detect any enemy activity, so set up this base. It had everything you need. It had huts, it had generators, it had a bunch of men far from home with nothing but time on their hands. And you know what happens to men far from home with nothing but time on their hands? The island tried to wipe them out. The weather would turn the normally dry, solid tundra into a sea of mud. Reports describe blizzards of hurricane velocity that buried the station under 8 meters of snow for up to 10 days at a time. You just know you'd end up getting buried for 10 days the day after you forgot to bring the risk board back in, after you threw it out because your supposed ally invaded Indonesia when your back was turned. Oh, I'm sorry, James. I thought we'd agreed to fight together to retake North Africa, but instead you're piling into Bali like a British stag do. And just to keep the building upright in this apocalyptic weather, the building needed 600 bags of cement to fortify the foundations. As if that wasn't bad enough. One winter day, it was a calm sea. The weather was nice. Perfect time to go out, do your patrols, do your duties. A boat with 5 servicemen patrolling the island vanished. No wreckage, no bodies, nothing. Vanished. It's less like a classic Agatha Christie story and more like the Santa Claus version of the Rapture. I'm actually filming this on the day that the Rapture's supposed to happen, and I seem to still be here, so I don't know. I probably shouldn't have that second can of Coke yesterday. I think that was it. You know, that's actually how Santa Claus recruits his elves. See, the bad children, they go on his list as a warning. They get coal as a warning. You keep ending up on that list. By the time you get to working age, because Santa don't mess with child labour laws, he zaps you to his workshop. Living on this base must have been like Survivor Arctic Edition, but really without any prizes. Just blizzards, polar bear skeletons, and being trapped by thick ice on all sides for 7 months of the year. It won't be a surprise to hear that the base was short-lived. It opened in 1943 and was closed by September 46. They whisked away most of the evidence that they were ever there, but today, a single structure remains. A glistening, pure white toilet, miraculously intact on the tundra in a display of human endeavour that brings a tear to my eye. Yes, we may be violent, we may be short-sighted, we may be fragile meat sacks that eat a whole bag of Skittles that did say it was a sharing bag, but me, we make a good toilet. Oh, beautiful for pooping in, brown skid marks down the rim. Yes, viewers, if you've been paying attention, that does mean that the bathroom was located outside of the main hut, which meant that for that 10-day period they were trapped inside by the blizzard, they were either holding it in, or they were pooping in the bed of whoever fell asleep first that night. Standard sleepover rules, you know. The legacy of the Loran station might just have been saved by the Mission Impossible film, because before they gave this island some heroic purpose, it was just a miserable place. Even just getting your mail required a full-on expedition and sledding team.
You actually deliver the mail in a boat, huh?
In the cold months, the mail planes could only get to within a few kilometers of the island, so they would drop the bag of mail onto the sea ice, alert the island. The men had to form 3 crews and rotate in shifts just to retrieve it, dragging a toboggan of survival supplies as they went. You really best hope you got some good mail after all that. Imagine spending days braving fatal weather conditions, losing another toe, eating nothing but crackers and trying to melt snow in your mouth for water, only to be told, "Dear Jeffrey, in response to your offer of courtship, lol." But to pass the time, they had a go at some wildlife management. Worried about food if the resupply got cut off, the Coast Guard introduced a small herd of reindeer to the island as like a living larder. What could go wrong? Chapter 5. The Reindeer Boom and Bust. This should have been titled, How to Ruin an Entire Ecosystem in One Easy Step. Your dentist hates this. So 29 young reindeer, 29 females and 5 males arrived from Nunavik Island in 1944. With no wolves, bears or active hunters to keep them in check, this was reindeer Disneyland. Endless lichen pastures, 0 natural predators, and especially because the soldiers, they're gonna leave just 2 years later. Like an Olympic village with a latex allergy. The stage was set for a population explosion. And indeed it happened. By 1957, the population had ballooned to 1,350 reindeer. Crazy. Oh, I bet I can't get any crazier than that, right? No, but by 1963 there were 6,000. 29 to 6,000. That's an increase of over 20,000%. Oh, the Olympic swimmers and gymnasts in the world couldn't manage that. Well, I mean, the reindeer were fat and munching happily. I mean, environmental success, right? We wiped out one megafauna but just replaced it with another. I mean, that's balance, right? Okay? We're okay? We cool? We cool, St. Matthew? Then St. Matthew reminded us why it is the undisputed champion of breaking humans.
Now it's Siberia.
The winter of 1963 to 64 was a doozy.
Watch out for that first step, it's a doozy!
Savage storms and deep snow battered and buried the island for the entire winter without letting up. No human dared approach St. Matthew Island for being swallowed by this vengeful maelstrom. By the time the storm subsided, the herd was gone. When biologists returned in 1966, they counted just 42 reindeer. 41 females, 1 infertile male, among a sea of bleached bones. An island that had been home to life again could only count the fading souls piled high amongst the ruins of human folly.
That's hubris, my friend.
I do feel for that infertile male that was left behind, or do I? I bet there's a curled up monkey's paw somewhere on St. Matthew Island. The nerdy reindeer who never left the station, wished to get all the ladies and caused an environmental cataclysm. And this incel of a reindeer was left disappointing a swathe of females literally to death. What would the incel on Santa's sled be called? Guna? On Dasher, on Dancer, on Guna. No, it's okay, you can stay home. Don't come near the children. And by the late 1970s, even those die-hard survivors were gone. St. Matthew went from 0 to 6,000 to 0 in under 40 years, thanks to a terrible human hand, overpopulation, and just one brutal winter. All of this combined to create the single largest die-off event in any deer species recorded in human history. This unintentional experiment came with a terrible lesson. St. Matthew and the Arctic have no mercy, have no justice, only cold, unforgiving balance. Chapter 6. The Modern Era. Still wild, still untamed. Today, St. Matthew Island mostly laughs at human ambition. No one lives there except for a few scientists that pop over on short visits. Instead, the island's rulers are mostly birds, some red foxes and a few voles. Polar bears, remember them? Not a single one has been seen since they disappeared. In fact, with the sea ice retreat plaguing the Arctic, it's pretty likely that no polar bear will ever see St. Matthew Island again. The birds, however, they are the island's true monarchs. Tens of thousands of seabirds nest on St. Matthew Island every year. Orcuts puff in so many species they fill the skies, they ride the waves, they poop on the cliffs every single summer. There's two songbirds in particular that make their stronghold here. The Mackay's bunting and a subspecies of the rock sandpiper. These two species nest almost exclusively on St. Matthew Island. Every 5 to 6 years, the US Fish and Wildlife Service drops by to survey how nature is doing, how the birds are doing. The last total that was taken found a list of over 125 species on the islands, which is amazing. So much diversity is thriving on St. Matthew's Island now. And actually, thanks to that 1899 expedition, which is the one that unfortunately categorized polar bears as extirpated from the island, the entire island group was set aside as one of America's first federal bird reservations in 1909. It's been designated as a wilderness since 1970, and it's been part of the Alaska Maritime National Wildlife Refuge since 1980. In short, aside from a few researchers who do insist that the mating rituals of the Mackay's bunting do make for a valuable PhD, nature has once again reclaimed its place as the true permanent natives of St. Matthew Island. Throughout all of St. Matthew's history, from the early days of two-lay fishers getting stranded on the island to the remarkable reindeer baby boom, St. Matthew stands there, tundra and all, sometimes fog-drenched, avalanche white. An island that says, nice try humans, come back when you can dig yourself out of 30 feet of snow. The human legacy here isn't some heroic adventure or scientific achievement. It's a toilet, slowly sinking into the permafrost, soon to join the fading shadows of the polar bears and reindeers that met their inevitable end at the hands of humans too hungry for their own survival. So yeah, this tiny island has spent over 1,000 years schooling humans. Tom Cruise's submarine escape in Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning is Hollywood magic. The real tale of St. Matthew, though, is stranger, harsher, and wilder than anything Cruise has ever done.
First, take a big step back and literally f*** your own face!
Thank you for joining me on this wild Arctic ride through St. Matthew's cursed past. If you've enjoyed hearing about the forgotten history of this remarkable island, do let me know. If there's any other topics you want me to talk about, you want me to do some research in, let me know as well. I've got plenty more strange Arctic tales up my sleeves. Narwhals, bees, there's bees in the Arctic. That time a scientist ate a polar bear's liver and documented him slowly dying because of vitamin A poisoning? That's gotta go on the list at some point. As always, if you've enjoyed the video, it really helps to give it a like, give it a comment, subscribe if you want to hear more crazy tales from the north. Stay warm, stay safe, and remember, if you ever build a shelter on a remote Arctic island, for the love of God, build the toilet inside your shelter. See you next time, Arcticus. Bye bye.